In 1974, a young man by the name of Steve dreamed of making movies. Steve had been born in 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Though his family would later move on to Phoenix, Arizona, where his dream of making movies seemed to many just another extension of his overactive imagination. By then, young Steve already showed ability for telling stories, and briefly considered becoming a writer before his true love manifested itself in the silver screen. From a very young age, his eyes were set far beyond the plains of Arizona, pointed instead towards the city of angels. Steve would fulfill his dream of moving to Hollywood after studying film in college, where he managed to secure a couple of directing gigs at the helm of two television shows, Night Gallery and Columbo. But it was not until 1974 when his first feature-length movie directorial debut would take place. After contacting a couple of producers already established in the industry, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, they agreed to let young Steve, then already going by Steven, direct his first movie based on a true crime story. The resulting film, The Sugarland Express, was the first feature-length movie poster to display the name of a Hollywood legend that in the decades later would become the most commercially successful director of all time, Steven Spielberg. The Sugarland Express went on to make $12 million on a budget of $3 million, establishing Spielberg as a director capable of making money and allowing his legendary career to take off. Such stories, worthy of cinematic adaptation themselves, seem to belong to an era long gone, an era where directors had an extreme level of ownership over the final product, capitalist chimeras of art and profit. Nowadays, franchises dominate the box office and streaming services, and the presence of the studio-mandated structure, tone, and even character arcs can be felt by both the director and the audience. In some scenes at huge IP debut, like Marvel, DC, or the Fantastic Beasts movies, you can feel that hidden behind the frame of your television, just out of frame, there is a suit organizing the entire spectacle. Welcome to Rebel Economics. Today we will talk about how Hollywood evolved from the single movie event era to the cinematic universe franchise model that now rules the box office across the world. If that sounds interesting, please consider subscribing. We do videos about business, finance, and economics, and would really appreciate your support. The perception of Hollywood as a shining paragon of creativity is nothing more than another fantastic but false story to come out of Tinseltown. Hollywood is a business. It was always one, and will remain so until the final movie is screened and the final actor receives his paycheck. When the credits roll on this form of media, there will be someone still reading expense reports. Nowhere is this tendency of Hollywood to sacrifice creative freedom in favor of making a quick buck than in the perpetual creation of sequels. Already in 1978, just 3 years after the original release of Jaws, the sequel, creatively named Jaws 2, graced the screens of the United States to a more moderate reception than its predecessor. This one was not in fact directed by Spielberg, who refused to record the sequel, considering that it was an unnecessary cash grab. In October 1975, Steven Spielberg told the San Francisco Film Festival that making a sequel to anything is just a cheap Carney trick, and that he didn't even respond to the producers when they asked him to direct Jaws 2. Steven felt that he had done the definitive shark movie. But if we know this, the director knows this, and the studios know this, then why are sequels so prevalent in the modern cinematic landscape? In an article by a trades magazine, the following explanation is given to the question of why has the movie industry been so fixated in sequels. For the production companies, actors, and brands involved in the film, it is a safe bet. You don't have to drum up interest in a new concept, story, or character, because there is a ready-made audience there for the taking. You can capitalize on the connections people already have with their favorite characters. This is an example of what Dr. Matthew Jones at Montfort University calls a pre-sold property, meaning an IP with established audiences that has already proven a market fit in the industry. And this all makes sense to a degree. On average, a sequel would require lower marketing and promotional expenses, since it does not need to create as much of a splash for audiences to realize it exists, since to a large degree, audiences are already waiting for it to happen. It must also be considered that not all sequels are created equal. Financially successful sequels develop on the characters and themes of the original story that audiences loved, and expand the world in meaningful ways while tying loose ends from the previous installments. For particularly savvy directors with an idea for a multi-movie story, it is with sequels where more complex dynamics can be explored, once removed from the standard arcs that tend to characterize the first movie in a series of releases. Take for example the dynamics that George Lucas could develop in Empire that would have not been possible in the original Star Wars. Additionally, sequels in the Harry Potter franchise bring in much more moral relativism than the fairly simple light versus darkness from the original. When it comes to remakes, however, the issue gets a little bit more complex. Take for example Disney, who is currently remaking in live action its entire animated collection of movies, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, Pinocchio and such. Clearly these movies have a pre-existing audience, seeing how Disney was a fundamental piece of the childhood of many ticket purchasing adults, who might even have children of their own to bring to the movies. So the economics fundamentals that regulate the appeal for studios and actors to partake in creating these movies are still very much at play. However, the impact of these movies in the cultural zeitgeist and the markets are markedly inferior. I struggle to think of any remake that people love more than the original. That is not to say that these Disney remakes lack quality. I am sure that the realistic animals of the Lion King remake were rendered using cutting-edge technology, but I personally still gravitate towards the original. However, their success is absolute. Except Mulan, for which no quality data is available due to its release in Disney+, the rest of the remakes made tons of money. The Lion King remake made over $1.5 billion in a budget of $260 million. Aladdin made another billion on a budget of $183 million, and Beauty and the Beast yet slightly above another billion on a budget of $160 million. So essentially, while some people might criticize Disney for these remakes, the truth is that they're swimming in money and unlikely to stop. Which brings us to cinematic universes. Ever since Nick Fury appeared at the end credits scene of the first Iron Man movie, it wasn't only Tony Stark's world that would change forever, it was ours too. The emergence of the modern cinematic universe is nothing less than a century-defining landmark in the media industry. Perhaps the universes that exist in 2099 will be different from the ones that we have now, but studios, directors, and actors will not easily forget the lessons that we, the audience, have taught them. Single movies are done. The age of serialized high-budget storytelling is here to stay. A cinematic universe is classically defined as a serialized, interconnected story expanding over many different individual IPs with their own standalone movies that come together in some sort of crossover event once every 5 years or so. Now, you might see that this definition is highly influenced by phases 1 and 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with each standalone movie serving to develop individual characters that would then assemble in an Avengers movie, which would serve as a third act of the phase and the payoff of many established storylines. Since that description of a cinematic universe is so partial to the MCU, I would like to propose a different, more encompassing version of the cinematic universe concept. A cinematic universe is a series of individual or ensemble cinematic or serialized releases that belong in a common ecosystem. This simplistic description contemplates how many of the upcoming cinematic universes will develop. Take for example the Game of Thrones universe that is being developed at HBO. After the bitter conclusion of Game of Thrones in 2019, HBO announced a multitude of shows that were going to take place in the world of Ice and Fire, created by George R.R. Martin, that will be coming to HBO Max in years to come. From The House of the Dragon, a prequel based on the Dance of the Dragon civil war in Westeros, to release in 2022, to a show about the Sea Snake and his odyssey around the world, to a rumored sequel to the original Game of Thrones show focused on Jon Snow. All of these elements clearly belong to the cinematic universe of Game of Thrones, even if they don't necessarily share a common timeline, and therefore cannot cross over with one another. Seeing how many of these shows mentioned above take place many years in the past from the original show's present, a similar thing occurs with Fantastic Beasts movies and Star Wars shows. that take place many years in the past relatively to the original Harry Potter timeline and the events of the rise of Skywalker. The point is that even if these movies and TV shows cannot cross over with a main timeline like Marvel is doing, they still have the potential to be successful and to capitalize on the existing passion many fans of the original releases and the source material still have for them. The economic incentives that fueled Hollywood to pump out sequels and remakes are still at play in the cinematic universe configuration of entertainment. The captive audiences of certain original properties will more easily transfer to these sister shows and movies, as compared to the cost of generating a completely new IP that has no pre-existing fan base. But what they do better than sequels and remakes is that a cinematic universe, while requiring a cohesive underlying feel, can certainly tell much more diverse stories that can individually attract new audiences into the franchise, while still keeping the core audience satisfied, but expanding on the standard mythos. Marvel is particularly good at this, seeing how they are essentially the architects of the modern iteration of the cinematic universe. The MCU fandom receives equally fans of the gritty political thriller that is Captain America and the Winter Soldier, the improvisational buddy comedy of Thor Ragnarok, and the societal touchstone that was Black Panther. Cinematic universes are as much a product of the corporatization of art as they are of an honest desire of fans to further explore a universe and characters in a scale that simply would not be possible in the traditional linear format of sequels. And successful media companies that wish to remain so will have to create their own around properties that people genuinely have love for, like Game of Thrones, Marvel, DC, or Harry Potter. Now, the quality of them might vary. Some, like the Wizarding World franchise, I believe they are failing spectacularly. But nonetheless, I believe that they're still on the right path towards the future of entertainment consumption. Thank you so much for watching Rebel Economics. The entertainment and movie industries are probably one of my favorite topics to discuss with anyone, so I thank you for listening to what I have to say. And hey, if you agree or disagree, leave a comment underneath and let me know. Besides that, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you in the next video.